There's a price correction coming and a reason why most players won't notice. It's a sure thing. It is a guarantee. Don't you want to get on the ground floor and make millions on the way up? Welcome back, everyone. MTG Moxman here. Thanks again for hanging out with me on the channel today. As we discuss a price correction, like I said, most people probably won't see coming. It's happened before, and players didn't see it back then either, back in 2020. Now, most of you have heard these terms over the last 36 months. Bear market, bull market, price correction, price crash, unregulated markets. It's all over the place, guys. And with interest rates rising, inflation everywhere else in the world, and the damage done by COVID-19, it's taken a long time for a lot of this stuff to unravel and find out where things are going. But right now, we see more stable interest rates. They're not jumping up like they were earlier. It seems like there's a calming of the market. We've seen a little more cash flow entering into unusual areas. And now we can jump into Magic the Gathering. That's where this conversation, of course, was headed today, and why I think most people will miss it. In mid to late 2020, we had our first major buyouts of things like on the reserve list nobody cared about before. Everything from Revised, Fallen Empires, Homelands, all kinds of crazy reserve list cards were being bought. Now, it wasn't just reserve list cards, it was also reserve list boxes, even regular Magic boxes, but that had some age. Things like Shards of Alara, Zendikar, Rise of the Eldrazi. A lot of these boxes got bought back then. And when they got bought, you know, everyone in the ivory tower was looking down going, how did we miss that? How do we get our hands on some of that money? And they were looking down, straight down. Because, they're looking down on us all the time. And ever since then, Wizards of the Coast has ramped up production on newer products with higher price tags. 30th anniversary? Too soon, you're right. We shouldn't be mentioning that in today's video. But when you look about some of the products that were successful, Modern Horizons 2, collector boxes in general, 2018, right? How about double flip trip masters or just regular double masters? Any way you slice it, Wizards had a lot of success bringing out new products at a higher price point to test the upper limits of what the player base of Magic the Gathering was willing to afford. Now let's pause there for a second and let's rewind to 2020. I told you we had buyouts of cards that were never bought out. We never saw Brain Geyser or Fork bought out, Fast Bond, Thrall Champion, Souldevi Excavations. That stuff never happened really. At least you didn't hear about it. But the funny thing is, going back to 2015, 2016, we didn't hear about most of the buyouts that had ever happened anyway. It's only since that time, the last 8 to 10 years, where we've had a lot of this information being posted, being put up in videos, being reported on by content creators like myself to give it to people. So now we can go back to where we were. These products, other than the 30th anniversary and price-sensitive consumers, have been successful. They were working, and Wizards was making money. They were getting into our pocketbooks with new artwork, new treatments to cards, and a very nice selection of powerful reprint cards. And then they started to realize they want more. They want to drain some of that pool of cash out, and they wanted to know other ways they could do it. And as they're thinking of all those ways, you can look at the people who collect reserveless cards. Less than 0.5% of Magic players, like a little itty-bitty sliver of the pie, actively collect reserveless cards. Now, the funny thing is, a lot of Commander players may own certain reserveless cards for Commander decks. So there are certain cards being bought by Commander players, which is, of course, the largest area of Magic right now. So certain cards are always going to be bought, but they're not a major portion of those cards because they're generally, those types of play cards are very expensive, like Wheel of Fortune stuff. They have a higher price tag. So there's that little sliver. But the wealth generated in that 0.5% dwarfs most sales of anything new in Magic, and Wizards knows it. So that's why they know they can price things at a higher price. And when you look back at these 0.5% Magic players who collect reserveless cards, you realize that a lot of those spikes were not by that 0.5%, but instead came from speculators. Players who were hoping to get rich with the money that was sloshing around in the reserve list would buy a low-end card, force the price up, and start doling out individual copies and selling them at a higher price. Now, in the end, some people made some money, some people didn't. Some people got in too late, others got burned entirely, but Magic as it stands today, after the crash, and it's not a correction, this was a crash because it's beyond 20%. So the crash we saw in low-end reserveless cards forced most of those speculators and investors out. Whatever's out there now, the prices we're seeing now, are much more close to the real prices these cards command nowadays. But again, we talked about all the new stuff that Wizards of the Coast is putting out, so you can't really expect old cards with lower print runs, lower availability, and harder to find near mint copies to really stay that low. But just like before in 2020, most players will never see it coming. If you're a player who always wanted to get Brain Geyser, you wanted a near mint copy. Well, it's only $14 right now. You can go on TCG Player right now and you could buy yourself one. Go to your local store, look it up at some other place, and you could buy a near mint copy for $14. Maybe fork. Maybe you've always wanted a fork for a commander deck. Maybe you don't care if it's near mint. Maybe you want to get a heavily played one for $15. The card used to be $150, $200. $15, really? Because that's where we're at. As those speculators were forced out and such a glut came back onto the market, boom, prices fell down. And the price correction that is coming, because the markets aren't dropping anymore. They're kind of going sideways, and some cards have a bit of an uptick. You can see it in the sales volumes and the sales cards. Players out there are noticing it. And it's not just reserveless collectors, it's anyone who plays Commander now might decide to go after one or two cards that they've always wanted to get their hands on. And they say, you know what? I saw a video here. I watched this YouTube content creator here, and they're right. These prices are pretty good. This is not bad. And they decide to go in there. They decide to spend $30 and buy a couple of cards. But as we've talked about, there's only so many copies available. And if a speculator comes in and buys 50 copies all at once, that the whole FOMO wheel starts going around again. So if there's a card you're after, I hope you've written it down, taken a look at the previous high, the previous low, decide if it's a right appropriate price for you, and you get the card you're after. You get any of the cards you're after, and the same for sealed boxes. This price correction is going to happen because the new boxes are so expensive, you can't really expect the old boxes with actual age, history, lore, and collectability to stay that low. They can't stay down there. Eventually, they're going to drift up. But that drifting up is what players miss because they're not following it. They're not looking to see how much a box of Shards of Alar is. They're not looking to see because they thought it was out of reach for so long, they've never gone back to look at how expensive or inexpensive some of these boxes have become. When Fallen Empires was up to $2,000 a box, and it's been drifting down ever since. Maybe you're a person who's always wanted to experience playing it, right? That's that opportunity that most people don't see because they're busy looking at the new Flash stuff that Wizards has put on the shelves. And it takes your eyes away. But right now, what we've seen with this little bit of a wider timetable between sets, players are looking back at some reserveless cards, especially dual lands. A lot of dual lands are selling. Maybe not enough to make the hot 10, but they're definitely there. So you can see the sales starting to accumulate. And a lot of it's heavily played copies, just things to play with. But they realize, should I spend $500 on this when I can get a dual land I've always wanted for half that? And that's where people start realizing that the reprints are coming around. Great new cards for new sets, absolutely. But anyone who's always wanted to get their first couple of dual lands, I think those people are taking the opportunity they see before them to buy some of them now, before prices start correcting and going up. But most people out there aren't even looking. They're not even noticing how cheap some of these cards are. The fact that I can go out and buy a complete set of the Dark, the weakest of the Four Horsemen, but still one of the Four Horsemen, the weakest one, I can buy a complete set for $1,200. That's just a couple of boxes of Modern Horizon. And when you're in that moment, that's how you know the price correction is going to happen. It's just a question of when. And the trending sideways on the market right now makes me think 12 to 14 months we'll see a turnaround on some of these cards, on some of these sealed boxes. Because as Wizards continues to push the envelope, Commander Masters, you are going to see older boxes look more attractive because the newest stuff coming out is $500-600 a box. And they look down the line. You look at Fallen Empires, maybe Alliances, maybe Ice Age, Mirage, Visions, Weatherlight. And you see they're only a couple of grand, and you're like, those are brand new boxes and they're commanding that price? But I can buy a box 25 years old. Probably less than a couple hundred left in the world. And I can own a piece of Magic history forever? That's where you know something's wrong. And the market just hasn't caught up yet. Most players are looking at the flash that Wizards shows them. But they're not looking at the value if they're a collector investor. If you're just a player, it really doesn't bother you because you just want to play with some singles and have a good time. But anybody who wants to see if there's a future value to the cards, any player out there who wants a little bang for their buck later on, or just likes to have that vintage piece hanging on a shelf for all time as part of an amazing Magic conversation on a Friday night, that's where you're looking. And that's where those players can have the opportunity to get in on some of this stuff while it's getting good. Prices aren't going to stay here. They're not going to stay forever, that's for sure. It just can't, the way that they're pushing. But the flash makes people miss it. And that's why players miss out on these good deals when they come around. That's why they miss out on Fork and Brain Geyser, Well of Knowledge. That's why they miss these cards. Elvish Farmer, that's right, the farmer's there. I mentioned him. Crazy stuff, guys. Crazy stuff. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me today. Like to see some comments in the comment section if you guys get a chance. I want to see what you guys are all thinking out there. Have you noticed this yourself? Have you taken a look locally to see how things are panning out for you guys? I'd like to know. And if you enjoyed the content today, I hope you'll consider hitting and smashing that subscribe button. And of course, thanks again for allowing me the opportunity to entertain you guys each and every day. It's a blast and it's a heck of a journey. I'll see you guys tomorrow for another video. Have an awesome day. Hey guys, a big shout out and thank you goes out to all the fantastic patrons on the channel. Thanks again for showing that support each and every day. Without my patrons, this content cannot happen. So thanks again, everyone. I look forward to tomorrow's video. I'll see you then. You know, for a person who wants to get, say, all 572 reserveless cards, all 572, we know there's some very expensive cards on the list, but so many are inexpensive right now. And when you compare those against the previous spike, if you're a person who always wanted to own, I think now is probably a pretty good time. Thanks a lot for hanging out, guys. I'll see you guys soon.